My name is Joey, and I'm 32 years old. Growing up, I was basically the family servant, because I reminded my mother of the man who left her my biological father. She treated me like a maid while showering my half-sister with love. 2 years ago, my father reached out to reconnect before his death, leaving me a substantial inheritance. Now my mother, who made my childhood a living nightmare, is demanding her fair share of the money. Before I share how I finally stood up to my mom after all these years, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever had to cut ties with toxic family members. My earliest memories aren't of birthday parties or family vacations. Instead, they're of hushed arguments between my parents late at night when they thought I was asleep. My father, Richard, was a businessman who traveled constantly. Each time he'd leave, my mother, Diane, would become increasingly bitter, her resentment building with each passing day he was gone. "You care more about your clients than your own family," she'd scream at him. I'd hide under my dinosaur print comforter, clutching my stuffed bear, trying to block out the sounds. "I'm doing this for us, for our future," my father would respond, his voice tired and defeated. "Someone has to pay the bills." This back and forth became our family's rhythm until I turned 5. That's when everything imploded. Dad had missed my kindergarten graduation because of an emergency meeting in Seattle. When he came home the next day with a toy truck and apologies, Mom finally snapped. "We don't need your gifts or your excuses, we need you. But you're never here," she hurled a vase across the room, narrowly missing his head. Joey deserves a father who's present, not some visitor who drops by between business trips. That night, Dad slept in the guest room. A week later, he moved out completely. Their divorce was finalized 3 months after that. At first, my father tried to remain in my life. He'd schedule weekend visits, call regularly, and even tried to attend my school events. But Mom seemed determined to erase him completely. She'd forget to tell me about his calls. Planned visits would get canceled last minute because I was suddenly sick or had important plans. When I'd ask about seeing Dad, her face would darken. "He doesn't really want to see you, Joey. He's just pretending because the court says he has to." Her words cut deep into my 5-year-old heart. Eventually, when I was around 7, the calls stopped coming. The scheduled visits disappeared from the calendar. My father moved to Chicago for a business opportunity, and just like that, he vanished from my life. I felt abandoned by him and resented by my mother, a lose-lose situation for a young child. As I grew older, something strange began happening. Every time I looked in the mirror, I could see more and more of my father staring back at me. We had the same square jawline, the same deep-set blue eyes, the same dimple on our right cheeks when we smiled. By the time I was 8, the resemblance was undeniable. My mother noticed it too. Her face would contort momentarily when she looked at me as if she was seeing a ghost. The first time my grandmother visited after the divorce, she gasped, "My goodness, Joey, you look exactly like your father did at your age." Mom abruptly ended the visit, claiming I had homework to finish. I tried everything to look less like him. I begged to dye my sandy blonde hair brown. I stopped smiling with my teeth showing because it highlighted the dimple. I even began slouching to disguise the tall, straight posture I'd inherited from him. Nothing worked. Every day I became more of a living reminder of the man who had hurt her. When I was 8, Mom met Greg at a parent-teacher conference. He was a divorced father in my class, and within 6 months they were married. I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe with a new father figure things would improve. Maybe Mom would finally be happy. For a brief while things did seem better. Greg was friendly if somewhat distant. He'd ruffle my hair occasionally and bring me along when he took his son, who lived primarily with his ex-wife, to baseball games. Mom seemed less tense, less likely to snap at small infractions. Then, when I was 12, my half-sister Chloe was born. She was Mom and Greg's perfect creation, a fresh start with no painful history attached. From the moment they brought her home from the hospital, the family dynamic shifted dramatically. Chloe could do no wrong. Her cries were immediately attended to, while my requests were met with annoyance. When relatives visited, Chloe was passed around for cuddles while I was sent to fetch drinks or snacks. Family photos began featuring the 3 of them, Mom, Greg, and baby Chloe, with me added as an awkward afterthought or sometimes not included at all. By the time I was 13, the division of labor in our house was clear. Mom and Greg worked. Chloe played. I served. Joey emptied the dishwasher before school. Joey, fold this laundry when you get home. Joey, we need you to watch Chloe while we go out tonight. When I'd point out that I had homework or wanted to join the basketball team, Mom would sigh heavily. We all have to make sacrifices for this family to work, Joey. Greg and I work hard all day. The least you could do is help around the house. But Chloe never had to help. She was too young or too busy with her activities. Even when she became a teenager and was perfectly capable of doing chores, the pattern was too established to change. I was the family workhorse. She was the precious princess. One particularly telling incident happened when I was 14. We were having a family portrait taken at a studio. The photographer positioned us in various groupings. First, Mom and Greg, then with Chloe added, then finally me. As I moved to stand beside them, Mom whispered to the photographer, "Could you actually take one more of just the three of us?" She didn't even try to hide it from me. I stood there, camera-ready smile frozen on my face as they posed without me. Greg glanced my way with a hint of discomfort but said nothing. That night I stared at my father's features in the bathroom mirror, and for the first time felt a surge of anger toward him for leaving me with people who clearly wished I wasn't there. By the time I reached high school, my role as the family servant was firmly established. My daily routine was exhausting: wake up at 5:30 to start breakfast for everyone, pack lunches, empty the dishwasher, and put in a load of laundry before school. After school, I'd rush home to clean, prep dinner, and help Chloe with her homework before starting my own around 8 or 9 at night. Weekends offered no respite. Saturday mornings began with Mom shaking me awake at 6. The gutters need cleaning, or the garage needs organizing, or we're having company so the house needs to be spotless. Meanwhile, Chloe would sleep until noon, then spend the day with friends while I worked. Meals became particularly demeaning. I was expected to cook, serve everyone refilled drinks, and clear plates, all while my own food got cold. I wasn't permitted to sit and eat until everyone else was served and settled. Joey, Greg needs more gravy. Joey, Chloe dropped her fork. Get her a clean one. Joey, I forgot the salt. Can you grab it? If I ever complained or even sighed in frustration, Mom would launch into her standard lecture. This family functions because we all play our part. Greg provides financially, I manage everyone's schedules and emotional needs, and you help with the physical tasks. That's just how families work. Except I knew from friends' houses that wasn't how all families worked. At Travis's house, everyone cleared their own plates. His younger sister had chores just like he did. His parents thanked them for helping. The contrast was stark and painful. School became my sanctuary. There at least I was judged on my own merits rather than my genetic connection to an absent father. I threw myself into academics, joining study groups that allowed me to stay away from home longer. I made the honor roll consistently, though my achievements were rarely acknowledged at home. Another A. Well, you have all that time to study while we handle the important family matters, Mom would say dismissively. My friendship with Travis became my lifeline. He lived just 2 blocks away and never questioned why I wanted to hang out at his place rather than mine. His parents were kind, treating me like another son. They'd ask about my day, compliment my grades, and sometimes send extra food home with me. Mrs. Collins, Travis's mom, once asked why my mother never attended parent-teacher conferences. I made up a story about her work schedule, too, ashamed to admit the truth. At home, the emotional abuse became more pointed as I grew into a teenager. Mom no longer tried to hide her resentment. "You're just like your father, selfish and inconsiderate," she'd snap if I forgot a chore or needed help with something. "Look at how sweet and thoughtful Chloe is. Why can't you be more like her?" became her constant refrain, even though Chloe was 7 years younger and held to completely different standards. "Your father never wanted a child. Did you know that I had to beg him to start a family and then he left at the first sign of responsibility?" She'd rewrite history, constantly painting my father as a monster and herself as the heroic single mother, conveniently forgetting she had remarried when I was 8 and that I did most of the household work. Greg witnessed all of this but never intervened. Occasionally, I'd catch him watching these interactions with discomfort, but his loyalty was to my mother and their daughter. I was the outsider, the reminder of her failed first marriage, the help. Over time, I began to internalize these messages. Maybe I was selfish for wanting time to myself. Maybe I did deserve less than Chloe. Maybe I was inherently less lovable because of whose son I was. These thoughts plagued me, eroding my self-worth day by day. The breaking point came when I was 16. After years of hard work, I was inducted into the National Honor Society. The ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and for once I asked my family to attend. "It's really important to me," I explained at breakfast 3 weeks before the event. "They'll call my name and give me a certificate. It only happens once." Mom looked up from feeding Chloe, who was now 9. "We'll see. What time is it again?" I told her, marked it on the family calendar, and even put a reminder note on the refrigerator. As the day approached, I reminded them twice more. On the night of the ceremony, I put on my one good button-down shirt and waited by the door. Mom rushed in from work, glancing at her watch. "Oh, Joey, I completely forgot Chloe has her soccer scrimmage tonight. Greg's already there with her. I need to head over too. It's her first game as team captain." My stomach dropped. "But the Honor Society ceremony, it starts in 30 minutes. She waved dismissively. "You can tell us all about it when we get home. This is a big night for your sister." I attended the ceremony alone, sitting between families who cheered and took photos as their children received recognition. When the principal called my name, the applause felt hollow without anyone there specifically for me. Mr. Delaney, my history teacher, gave me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder as I returned to my seat. When I got home 3 hours later, I found streamers and balloons decorating the living room. A cake sat on the dining table with "Congratulations, Captain Chloe," written in pink icing. They were still celebrating, music playing as Chloe recounted every detail of her game to adoring parents. No one asked about my ceremony. No one noticed I was clutching a certificate and pin. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before quietly heading upstairs to my room. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tears silently streaming down my face. Something broke inside me, some last hope that things might change, that I might somehow earn their love and approval. Instead, I made a decision. I would focus all my energy on escape. Education would be my ticket out of this house. I would work harder, study longer, and find a way to college, preferably one far away from here. I dried my tears and began researching scholarships that very night. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I wasn't the family servant, a future where I might actually matter. Getting into college was just the first hurdle. Paying for it was another challenge entirely. While Chloe's college fund was frequently discussed at the dinner table, we're up to $30,000 already, and she's only 12. No such fund existed for me. When my acceptance letter from State University arrived, Mom's response was tepid at best. "I hope you've looked into financial aid," she said, barely glancing at the letter. "We can't afford to support you." I had indeed researched every possible option. Through a combination of academic scholarships, work-study programs, and student loans, I managed to cobble together enough to cover tuition. Living expenses were another matter. I spent my freshman year working 20 hours weekly at the campus cafeteria, another 15 at a coffee shop off campus, all while maintaining a full course load. My room in the cheapest dormitory became my first true space. Small and shared with a roommate, it nevertheless felt like paradise compared to home. No one woke me at dawn to clean. No one compared me unfavorably to a sibling. No one made me wait until everyone else had eaten before I could have my meal. Despite the physical distance, my mother still found ways to exert control. Phone calls would come late at night. "Joey, the garbage disposal is broken, and Greg is swamped at work. You need to come home this weekend to fix it. Your sister misses you. She's feeling abandoned. The least you could do is visit more often. What kind of son goes 3 weeks without checking on his mother, after all I've done for you?" Each manipulation tactic pulled at deeply ingrained guilt. I'd find myself on the bus home, spending precious study time and money I couldn't spare to deal with emergencies that somehow always translated to household chores or errands that could have been handled without me. During family gatherings, Mom would introduce me to relatives with backhanded compliments. "This is Joey, my son, who's too busy with college to visit his family," or "Joey finally made time for us today." Meanwhile, she'd brag about my grades and internships to friends, taking credit for my success. I always pushed him academically. That's why he's doing so well. After graduation, I secured an entry-level position at a marketing firm in a city 90 minutes from my hometown, close enough to visit occasionally but far enough to establish some independence. My tiny studio apartment became my sanctuary, decorated with second-hand furniture but filled with peace I'd never known in my childhood home. Yet even as I built my career and independent life, the emotional scars remained. My first serious girlfriend, Amanda, ended our relationship after 8 months, with a painful observation: "You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, Joey. You act like you expect me to start treating you terribly any minute. I can't break through those walls you've built." She wasn't wrong. I approached relationships with constant anxiety, overperforming to prove my worth, apologizing for needs or opinions, flinching at normal disagreements. 3 more relationships followed the same pattern: initial connection undermined by my inability to trust that I was truly wanted or valued. At 27, after another breakup, I finally sought therapy. Dr. Karen Phillips was the first person who truly helped me see the abnormality of my upbringing. "What you're describing isn't normal family dynamics, Joey," she said during our 3rd session. "Being assigned age-appropriate chores is normal. Being treated as household help while a sibling is exempt is not. Being ignored or criticized while a sibling is celebrated is emotional neglect and abuse." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd normalized my treatment for so long that having someone name it as abuse was both validating and terrifying. We spent months unpacking my childhood, identifying patterns of manipulation, and developing strategies for setting boundaries with my mother. The first time I declined a demand to drive home for a family emergency, cleaning out the garage before a neighborhood inspection, my hands shook as I hung up the phone. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the sense of empowerment. Small steps followed, limiting calls to once weekly, declining unreasonable requests, leaving visits when the criticism became too much. Mom's response to my newfound boundaries was predictable: more guilt, more manipulation, more criticism. But something had shifted inside me. I was beginning to value myself enough to withstand her disapproval. Then, shortly after my 30th birthday, an unexpected email arrived that would change everything. "Joey, my name is Richard Mercer. I'm your biological father. I understand if you want nothing to do with me, but I've been trying to find a way to contact you for years. If you're willing, I'd like to meet and explain some things. My number is below if you want to talk." I stared at the message for hours, emotions warring within me. Anger at his abandonment, curiosity about his version of events, fear of reopening old wounds. After consulting with Dr. Phillips, I decided to respond with caution. "I'm willing to hear what you have to say. I can meet for coffee next Saturday at 2, Central Cafe on Market Street." His reply came within minutes: "I'll be there. Thank you for giving me this chance." The week that followed was a tornado of emotions. Part of me wanted to cancel. Another part desperately needed answers. When Saturday arrived, I arrived at the cafe 30 minutes early, choosing a corner table with a clear view of the door. At exactly 2 o'clock, a tall man with graying, sandy blonde hair entered, scanning the room. The resemblance was so striking, it took my breath away. It was like seeing myself in 20 years. Our eyes met, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then he approached slowly, as if afraid I might bolt. "Joey." His voice was hesitant, tinged with hope and fear. "Yes," I managed, standing awkwardly. What followed was the first of many conversations that would completely reshape my understanding of my childhood. Richard explained that after the divorce, he had indeed tried to maintain a relationship with me. "I called every Sunday at 6 like clockwork. Most times your mother said you were busy or not feeling well. I sent birthday and Christmas gifts that she told me later you hadn't wanted. I filed for formal visitation rights, but your mother filed counter motions claiming I was unstable and a bad influence." He pulled out a manila envelope filled with court documents, child support payment records, and copies of returned letters. "I paid support every month, Joey, above what the court required. I never missed a payment." I felt sick as I looked through the papers. Child support that I never saw benefits from. Court orders for visitation that were never honored. Cards and letters returned unopened. "When you were 12, I hired a private investigator to check on your welfare after your mother stopped accepting my calls completely. He reported that you seemed physically well cared for, and I didn't have grounds to fight for custody. When you were 15, I tried to contact you directly through your school, but your mother threatened a restraining order. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as my own. Eventually, I had to accept that fighting might cause you more harm than good. It was the hardest decision I ever made. I've regretted it every day since. I didn't know what to believe, but the documentation was compelling. We agreed to meet again the following week. That meeting turned into regular coffee dates, then occasional dinners. Each conversation filled in more blanks, answered more questions. Richard was successful, having built a commercial real estate business in Chicago. He'd never remarried or had other children. I never stopped thinking of myself as your father, he explained, even when I couldn't be there. I was cautious but increasingly curious about this man who shared my features and mannerisms. Our shared interests in history, basketball, and classic rock provided neutral ground for building a tentative relationship. 3 months into our reconnection, I accidentally mentioned meeting Richard during an obligatory Sunday call with my mother. "You've been seeing WHO." Her voice rose to a shriek. "After everything he did, after abandoning us, how could you betray me like this?" "Mom, he's shown me documentation that contradicts a lot of what you've told me," I said carefully. "Child support, receipts, court records. Those could be faked," she interrupted. "He's manipulating you, just like he always did me. He's probably after something. What have you told him about us?" The conversation devolved from there. Greg got on the phone to back up my mother, claiming he remembered how devastated she'd been by my father's abandonment. The irony of his concern after years of enabling my mistreatment wasn't lost on me. A week later, Richard shared news that changed everything again. He'd been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. His doctors gave him 6 to 8 months. "I'm not telling you this to burden you or to force a relationship," he said, his face gaunt but determined. "But I want you to know why I reached out now. I couldn't die without at least trying to explain, to make some amends for not fighting harder." The news hit me harder than I expected. This man who I was just getting to know was already preparing to leave. Despite my lingering reservations, I found myself wanting to make the most of whatever time we had. As Richard and I grew closer, my mother's behavior worsened. She escalated her demands on my time, called my workplace with manufactured emergencies, and began spreading rumors to extended family that I was abandoning them for that deadbeat who never wanted you anyway. The final straw came at Thanksgiving. I declined my mother's invitation, choosing instead to spend the holiday with Richard, who was growing noticeably weaker. She showed up at my apartment that night, Greg and Chloe in tow. "So this is what matters to you now," she said, pushing past me into my living room. "Some dying man who never cared enough to be your father. What about the people who actually raised you?" I took a deep breath, summoning the techniques I'd learned in therapy. "Mom, I'm establishing a relationship with my biological father before I lose the chance forever. This doesn't have to affect my relationship with you unless you make it an issue." Her face contorted with fury. "It's him or us, Joey. You can't have both. If you continue seeing that man, you're no longer welcome in our home." In that moment, looking at her angry face and Greg's uncomfortable one, something crystallized for me. This was the same choice she'd forced on me as a child: loyalty to her narrative at all costs. "If that's how you feel, then I guess I've made my choice," I said quietly. "Please leave now." As they turned to go, 16-year-old Chloe lingered behind. "I don't agree with Mom," she whispered. "Call me sometime, okay?" It was the first time I'd felt any real connection with my half-sister. With that ultimatum, my tenuous relationship with my mother effectively ended. I focused instead on making the most of Richard's remaining time. The coffee shop reunion with Richard had been awkward but civil. Sitting across from the man whose features I saw in the mirror daily was surreal. We looked so similar that the barista assumed we were father and son, without being told, an observation that made Richard smile sadly and me shift uncomfortably in my seat. "I don't expect forgiveness," he began after we'd settled with our drinks, "but I would like a chance to explain what happened from my perspective." I nodded stiffly, prepared for excuses about career priorities or the challenges of fatherhood. What I wasn't prepared for was the documentation. He brought a folder containing child support receipts, court filings, and visitation requests spanning years. I never missed a payment, he explained, sliding the records across the table. In fact, I often sent extra hoping it would be used for your extracurricular activities or college fund. The amounts were substantial, far more than what would have covered basic needs. Money I never saw benefit from while I worked multiple jobs to put myself through college. As for visitation, I filed repeatedly for my court-ordered time with you. Your mother claimed you were sick, had important events, or simply didn't want to see me. Eventually, she got a sympathetic judge to restrict my access based on claims that my visits were emotionally disturbing to you. He showed me letters he'd written, dozens of them that had been returned unopened, birthday cards with uncashed checks, Christmas presents that had apparently never reached me. When you were about 12, she changed her number and moved without providing a forwarding address. It took my lawyer months to locate you. By then, she had remarried, and the court was reluctant to disrupt your new family unit with forced visitation. His eyes, so much like my own, held mine steadily. I'm not saying I was perfect, Joey. I traveled too much for work. I wasn't as present as I should have been during the marriage, but I never, ever willingly abandoned you. I didn't know what to believe, but the documentation was compelling enough that I agreed to meet again. Our second meeting was less formal at a casual restaurant where we discovered a mutual appreciation for historical documentaries and basketball. You played in high school, Richard asked, seeming genuinely interested. No, I wanted to, but I had too many responsibilities at home, I explained, then immediately regretted revealing this glimpse into my childhood. Richard's expression darkened. What kind of responsibilities? Something about his sincere concern cracked open a door I'd kept firmly shut. Before I realized it, I was describing my role as the family housekeeper, the different treatment between me and Chloe, the constant comparisons and criticism. She said it was because I reminded her of you, I finished quietly, that I looked too much like the man who hurt her. Richard's hands gripped his water glass so tightly, I thought it might shatter. Joey, I am so sorry. I had no idea. The investigator I hired reported that you seemed well cared for. I never imagined. His evident distress seemed genuine, making me question the narrative I'd grown up with. We began meeting weekly, filling in gaps in each other's lives. He told me about building his business from scratch after the divorce, about his love for architecture that influenced his real estate development work, about his own difficult childhood with an alcoholic father. I cautiously shared stories from school, my current job, my struggles with relationships. Each meeting became easier, the conversation more natural. After 2 months, it was impossible to deny that we shared not just physical traits, but temperament, interests, and even mannerisms. During one dinner, Richard hesitantly asked about my college experience. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, he said, but I can't help wondering if it was harder than it needed to be. I set up a college fund for you when you were born. By the time you were 18, it should have had over $100,000 in it. My fork clattered against my plate. There was never any college fund. I worked 2 jobs and took out loans. Richard's face confirmed what I already suspected, another truth hidden from me. Another resource that should have been mine diverted elsewhere. 4 months into our reconnection, I slipped and mentioned Richard during a rare call with my mother. Her reaction was explosive. You've been seeing that deadbeat after everything he did to us. Her voice rose to a pitch I recognized from childhood, the tone that usually preceded punishment. He's shown me documentation of child support payments and visitation requests, I said calmly. Things don't seem to match what you told me. He's manipulating you. Those papers could be faked. You're betraying me after everything I sacrificed to raise you alone. I took a deep breath. You weren't alone, Mom. You had Greg from the time I was 8. And I did most of the household work from the time I was old enough to reach the sink. There was a dangerous pause. So that's what this is about. You had to do some chores and now you're bitter. Everyone contributes to a family, Joey. You're being ridiculous. The conversation ended with her threatening to cut me off if I continued seeing Richard, a threat that carried little weight given how little support she'd ever provided. The next bombshell came a week later. Richard called, his voice strained, and asked to meet urgently. When I arrived at his hotel, I was shocked by his appearance. In just a week, he seemed to have aged years. The doctors found cancer, he said, without preamble. Pancreatic stage 4. They're giving me 6 to 8 months. The news hit me with unexpected force. This man, who I was just beginning to know, whose existence filled crucial gaps in my understanding of myself, would soon be gone again. I didn't tell you to create obligation, he assured me, misreading my silence. I just wanted you to understand why I reached out now, why it couldn't wait. I couldn't die without at least trying to make amends. Over the following weeks, Richard introduced me to extended family members I'd never known. His brother Alan and sister Patricia, cousins and friends, who remembered me as a baby. They shared photos of me with my father, that I'd never seen stories of a man who was flawed, but not the monster my mother had described. He was devastated after losing you, Alan told me during a family dinner. It changed him. He threw himself into work because he didn't know what else to do with his grief. As Richard's health declined, I found myself spending more time with him, learning about our shared family history, getting to know the man behind the absence. Each visit seemed precious, filled with conversations we should have had years ago. Meanwhile, my mother's behavior escalated from angry calls to actual sabotage. She somehow got my work phone number and called with family emergencies that disrupted important meetings. She sent flying monkeys relatives and old family friends to guilt me about abandoning her and Chloe. "Your sister misses you," became her favorite manipulation tactic, using Chloe as an emotional pawn. The situation came to a head when Richard was hospitalized after collapsing at his hotel. I was listed as his emergency contact and spent the night at the hospital. When I returned to my apartment the next morning, I found my mother, Greg, and Chloe waiting outside my door. "So this is what matters to you now?" Mom demanded, her voice carrying down the hallway. "Some dying man who never cared enough to be your father. What about the people who actually raised you?" I was too exhausted for this confrontation. "Mom, please. I'm establishing a relationship with my biological father before I lose the chance forever. This doesn't have to affect my relationship with you, unless you make it an issue." Her face contorted with fury. "It's him or us, Joey. You can't have both. If you continue seeing that man, you're no longer welcome in our home." Greg stood silently behind her, his face uncomfortable, but committed to supporting his wife. 16-year-old Chloe looked confused and upset. "If that's how you feel, then I guess I've made my choice," I said quietly. "Please leave now." As they turned to go, Chloe lingered behind. "I don't agree with Mom," she whispered. "Call me sometime, okay?" It was the first time I'd felt any real connection with my half-sister. With that ultimatum, I focused entirely on making Richard's final months as meaningful as possible. We talked about everything: his regrets, my childhood, what might have been. Despite the painful circumstances, these conversations brought a healing I hadn't known I needed. Richard's condition deteriorated rapidly over the next 2 months. What began as occasional weakness progressed to hospital stays, then hospice care. I rearranged my work schedule to spend afternoons with him, bringing books we both enjoyed and sharing meals when he could eat. These quiet hours together held a strange mixture of grief and gratitude. Grief for the years we'd lost, the relationship we could have had. Gratitude for the chance to know him now, however briefly. "I want you to know," he told me during one lucid afternoon, his voice barely above a whisper, "that meeting you again, seeing the man you've become, despite everything it's given me peace I didn't deserve." I held his frail hand, no longer angry at the father who'd left, but mourning the father I'd been prevented from knowing. "I'm glad we had this time," I said simply. We talked about everything in those final weeks: his business successes and failures, my career aspirations, shared memories of places we'd both loved independently. He told me stories about my grandparents who had died before I could know them, and about my early years before the divorce. "You were such a happy baby," he recalled, his eyes distant with memory. "You laughed all the time, especially when I'd toss you up in the air. Your mother used to scold me for getting you too excited before bedtime." These glimpses into a time before resentment colored everything felt like precious gifts. They allowed me to reconstruct a more complete picture of my early life, of my parents before they became enemies. Richard passed away peacefully on a Tuesday morning in October. I had stepped out to get coffee when the nurse called. By the time I returned, he was gone. I sat beside him for a long while, thanking him for finding me, for trying to make things right. The funeral was held 3 days later. My mother and her family didn't attend, though. I'd sent a formal notification out of courtesy. Richard's brother Alan delivered a moving eulogy about a man who built success from nothing but never recovered from losing his only child. Friends and colleagues spoke of his integrity in business, his generosity to employees, his quiet philanthropy. I was introduced as Richard's son to people who hadn't known I existed. Some seemed surprised, others nodded, as if a missing piece of the puzzle had been found. "He had your picture on his desk," one associate told me. "All these years. He never forgot you." Travis drove 3 hours to attend, standing supportively beside me throughout the service. "You okay?" he asked, as we watched the casket being lowered. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "I got more closure in 3 months than I thought possible." A week after the funeral, I received a call from Mr. Calloway, Richard's attorney. "We need to meet regarding your father's estate," he explained. "Are you available tomorrow morning?" I arrived at the attorney's office expecting a small bequest, perhaps some family photos or mementos. Instead, I found myself facing a substantial inheritance. Richard had left me everything, his commercial property holdings valued at over $3 million, though most were tied up in the business liquid assets of $1.2 million and his personal residence in Chicago. "He updated his will immediately after reconnecting with you," Mr. Calloway explained. "There was never any question in his mind that you were his heir." A sealed letter accompanied the will. Richard's handwriting was shaky but determined. "Joey, I know this comes too late to make up for the years we lost. No amount of money can restore the relationship we should have had, but perhaps it can give you options. I never had freedom to pursue your dreams without the financial burdens I faced at your age. I earned this through hard work, and now it belongs to you, my son. Use it well, and know that I am prouder of you than you can imagine. Love, Dad." I left the office in a daze, the letter clutched in my hand. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was validation. Proof that I had mattered to someone, that I had been worth remembering, worth providing for. Over the next few days, I considered what to do with this unexpected wealth. I made appointments with a financial advisor, researched investment options, and thought about buying a modest house. I also decided to donate a portion to a foundation supporting children of divorce, a cause that felt deeply personal. Then inevitably the news reached my mother. She called on a Sunday evening, her voice trembling with emotion I hadn't heard from her in years. "Joey, honey, I just heard about Richard. I'm so sorry for your loss." The sudden sympathy from someone who had issued an ultimatum against seeing Richard just months earlier was jarring. I thanked her stiffly, waiting for the real reason behind the call. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, "about how things have been between us. I may have been too harsh about your relationship with your father. Grief makes us say things we don't mean." I remained silent, sensing the direction this was heading. Anyway, her voice softened further. "I heard he left you some money. That's wonderful, honey. You deserve it after everything you've been through." There it was. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar weariness. Yes, he did. "You know, your sister's college tuition is coming up next year. And Greg and I have been struggling a bit with the mortgage since his hours were cut back." A delicate pause. "I was thinking, since family helps family, maybe this is an opportunity to make things right between all of us." The audacity was breathtaking. After years of treating me as the family servant, after giving me an ultimatum about seeing my dying father, after making it clear I wasn't a valued member of the family, now she wanted to benefit from my inheritance. "I need some time to think about this," I said, not trusting myself to say more. "Of course, honey. Family is forever, you know. No matter what's happened, blood is thicker than water." The calls continued over the next week, becoming increasingly frequent and transparent. Mom suggested I could make up for lost time by helping Chloe with college expenses, the sister who had received every advantage, while I worked multiple jobs to put myself through school. She mentioned home repairs they'd been putting off, medical expenses that weren't covered by insurance, even a family vacation that would help us reconnect. Then came the unannounced visit. I opened my door one evening to find Mom and Greg standing there with Chloe hovering uncomfortably behind them. "We thought this conversation would be better in person," Mom said, pushing past me into the apartment I'd worked so hard to afford. What followed was the most uncomfortable hour of my adult life. Mom alternated between reminiscing about happy family memories that never happened and making increasingly direct statements about financial need. "Your father owed me for raising you alone," she declared, eventually abandoning all pretense. "That child support barely covered the basics. Do you know how much I sacrificed for you? How hard it was?" I looked at her incredulously. "You weren't alone after I was 8. And from the time I was 12, I did most of the household work while Chloe was treated like a princess." "Oh, here we go with the chores again." She threw up her hands. "Every child has responsibilities." "Not like mine," I said quietly. "Normal kids don't cook dinner for the family every night. They don't do everyone's laundry. They don't miss school events because they're required to babysit. They aren't treated like servants while their siblings get everything." "That's a complete exaggeration," Greg interjected, speaking for the first time. "You had a perfectly normal childhood." Something inside me snapped. Years of suppressed feelings broke through the careful control I'd maintained in therapy. Normal. Let me tell you what normal isn't. Normal isn't being woken up at 5:30 every morning to make breakfast for everyone while Chloe slept until 9. Normal isn't being excluded from family photos or activities because I look too much like my biological father. Normal isn't having college funds for one child and nothing for the other. I turned to my mother, whose face had gone pale. Normal isn't sabotaging a child's relationship with their other parent out of spite. "Richard showed me the child support receipts, Mom. Where did that money go? Because it certainly wasn't spent on me." The room fell silent. Even Greg looked uncomfortable. "And now you want part of my inheritance." I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. "After everything you did, after making me feel unwanted my entire childhood, after forcing me to choose between you and my dying father, you think you deserve his money." Mom's shock quickly morphed into anger. "How dare you speak to me this way? After all I've done, you were always difficult, always ungrateful. This just proves it." Greg stood, pulling Mom up with him. "We're not going to sit here and be insulted. Either you help your family with some of that windfall, or you'll regret it." I walked calmly to the door and opened it. "I think we're done here. Please leave." As they stormed out, Chloe hesitated. "Joey, I didn't know," she whispered, "about any of this. I'm sorry." Her apology, simple as it was, meant something. She hadn't created the toxic dynamic, she'd just benefited from it. "It's not your fault," I told her quietly. "Call me if you need to talk." After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment, shaking with adrenaline, but feeling strangely liberated. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to my mother without flinching, without apologizing, without doubting myself. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. The next day, I received a text from my mother. "This family has done everything for you, and this is how you repay us. You'll regret choosing money over family. Don't bother coming for Christmas." I read it twice, then blocked her number. The threat that would have devastated me a year ago now felt like a gift, freedom from obligation to people who had never truly acted like family. The confrontation in my apartment marked a turning point. After years of swallowing my truth to keep the peace, I had finally spoken the reality of my childhood aloud. The words had poured out of me with the force of a dam breaking, years of pent-up pain finally acknowledged. Normal isn't being woken up at 5:30 every morning to make breakfast for everyone while Chloe slept until 9. Normal isn't being excluded from family photos or activities because I looked too much like my biological father. Each example I cited was a specific memory, a wound that had never properly healed. The shock on their faces told me they had never expected me to speak so directly, to remember so clearly. They had counted on my lifelong pattern of acquiescence, of accepting whatever narrative they created. Normal isn't having college funds for one child and nothing for the other. Normal isn't sabotaging a child's relationship with their other parent out of spite. Mom's face had cycled through expressions: shock, then anger, then a calculated victim pose. I recognized from childhood conflicts. "How dare you speak to me this way? After all I've done, you were always difficult, always ungrateful. This just proves it." Her reaction was painfully predictable: denial, deflection, and attack. Rather than acknowledge any wrongdoing, she immediately positioned herself as the victim of my ingratitude. Greg had backed her as always. "We're not going to sit here and be insulted. Either you help your family with some of that windfall, or you'll regret it." The threat hung in the air as I showed them out. Only Chloe had seemed genuinely affected, whispering, "Joey, I didn't know about any of this. I'm sorry." Her apology, simple as it was, meant something. She hadn't created the toxic dynamic, she'd just benefited from it. "It's not your fault," I told her quietly. "Call me if you need to talk." I expected the confrontation to be the end of it. I was wrong. Within days, my mother launched a multi-pronged attack. First came the emotional manipulation via text. "This family has done everything for you, and this is how you repay us. You'll regret choosing money over family. Don't bother coming for Christmas." I read it twice, then blocked her number. The threat that would have devastated me a year ago now felt like a gift, freedom from obligation to people who had never truly acted like family. Next came the flying monkeys, relatives and family friends calling to tell me how worried my mother was, how hurt she felt by my sudden change in behavior. Aunt Linda, who had witnessed my treatment but never intervened, called to lecture me about family loyalty. "Your mother sacrificed everything for you," she insisted. "She's devastated that you're believing lies from a man who abandoned you." "Aunt Linda," I replied calmly, "you were there for my 16th birthday when Mom forgot to get me a cake, but had an elaborate party for Chloe the same week. You saw how differently we were treated." Her uncomfortable silence spoke volumes. "Well, no family is perfect," she finally managed. The calls continued until I began screening carefully. Meanwhile, I consulted with Mr. Calloway about protecting my inheritance. He suggested a cease and desist letter after I showed him the barrage of demanding texts from my mother and Greg that had come through before I blocked them. "This constitutes harassment," he explained. "The threats, while vague, establish a pattern of coercive behavior. We can send a formal letter instructing them to stop all contact." The letter went out on official letterhead. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from a discount attorney they'd hired claiming emotional distress and alleging they were entitled to a portion of the inheritance due to their financial and emotional investment in my upbringing. Mr. Calloway reviewed it and laughed. "This has no legal merit whatsoever. Your father's will is ironclad, and they have no standing to contest it as non-relatives of the deceased. This is pure intimidation." He drafted a response that effectively ended their legal attempts, but the personal attacks escalated. Mom created a social media post claiming I had abandoned my real family for money, from a stranger, tagging mutual acquaintances and distant relatives. Former neighbors and parents of childhood friends messaged me, confused by her version of events. I had spent a lifetime hiding the truth about my family dynamics, but now I found myself calmly correcting the record, not with angry rants or public accusations, but with simple, verifiable facts when asked directly. My mother and I have different memories of my childhood, I would say. I'm choosing to maintain my boundaries for my own well-being. Or sometimes more directly, I was treated very differently from my half-sister growing up. My father's inheritance has brought those differences to a head. Travis, who had witnessed some of my childhood treatment, became an unexpected ally, occasionally confirming my accounts to mutual friends who questioned me. "I saw how Joey was treated," he would say. "He's not making this up." The most surprising development came from Chloe. A month after the confrontation, she called from a friend's phone. "Mom took away my phone after she found out I was texting you," she explained. "She says you're trying to turn me against her." "I would never do that, Chloe. You and Mom have a different relationship than she and I did. That's okay. But the things you said about how you were treated," her voice faltered. "I started paying attention after that day, noticing things, looking at old photo albums. You're barely in any family pictures, Joey. And I found your old journals in the attic when I was looking for school projects." My stomach dropped. "My journals? From when you were 14 or 15. You wrote about having to get up early to cook and clean, about missing honor society because of my soccer game." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know, Joey. I swear I didn't understand." Hearing my teenage words reflected back to me was surreal. I had forgotten those journals existed, private outlets for feelings I couldn't express openly. "It's not your fault," I assured her again. You were a child. This is between Mom and me. She and Greg are fighting about money all the time now, Chloe continued. She keeps saying you owe us because she sacrificed everything raising you. But then I found a box with birthday cards from your dad in the attic. They had checks inside that were never cashed. Why would she keep the cards but not give you the money? The discovery confirmed what Richard had told me. He'd sent regular gifts that had been intercepted. That's something you should ask Mom, I said carefully, not wanting to drive a wedge between them despite everything. I did, Chloe replied. She got really angry and said I was invading her privacy. Then she took my phone and said I couldn't see you anymore. A pause. I'm 18 next year. I'm thinking about moving out after graduation. The conversation left me unsettled. I didn't want to damage Chloe's relationship with our mother, but I also couldn't continue perpetuating the lies that had defined my childhood. The truth, once spoken, seemed to be creating its own ripples. 2 months after the confrontation, the harassment finally subsided. My mother made one final attempt, showing up at my workplace to create a scene, but security escorted her out, and my boss was surprisingly understanding after I briefly explained the situation. Family estrangement is more common than people realize, she said kindly. Take whatever time you need if this happens again. But it didn't happen again. The cease and desist letter, the failed legal challenge, and perhaps the realization that I would not be manipulated or intimidated finally sank in. The attack stopped. The flying monkeys retreated. The social media campaign fizzled as people lost interest. I was finally free. Not just physically independent as I had been since college, but emotionally liberated from the obligation to maintain a relationship with people who had never truly wanted me, only what I could do for them. The inheritance from Richard wasn't just financial security. It was vindication. Proof that I had mattered to someone, that I had been worth remembering, worth providing for. The money itself was secondary to that recognition. The months following the confrontation were both liberating and challenging. Without the constant emotional drain of managing my mother's demands and manipulation, I discovered energy I never knew I had. Yet there were moments of doubt, of ingrained guilt, that therapy helped me recognize and address. It's normal to question your decision, Dr. Phillips assured me during a session. You've been conditioned your entire life to prioritize your mother's needs and feelings above your own. Breaking that pattern feels wrong even when it's healthy. She was right. Some mornings I would wake up with a knot of anxiety, a lifetime habit of worrying about disappointing my mother. But these moments became less frequent as I established new routines, new traditions, new definitions of family. Travis and his parents invited me for holidays, treating me with the casual warmth I'd always envied in other families. You're stuck with us now, Mrs. Collins joked at Thanksgiving, piling extra mashed potatoes onto my plate, in a motherly gesture that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I approached the inheritance with careful consideration. After consulting with financial advisors, I invested the bulk of the money, ensuring long-term security without dramatic lifestyle changes. I purchased a modest townhouse in a neighborhood I'd always admired. Nothing flashy, but mine in a way no place had ever been. In honor of Richard, I established a scholarship fund for children of acrimonious divorces, $10,000 annually, to a student who had overcome family adversity. The first recipient was a young woman whose essay about mediating between battling parents brought me to tears. The most meaningful use of the inheritance, however, was establishing a small marketing consultancy, focusing on nonprofit organizations. Richard had built his business from scratch. Now I was building something of my own, incorporating the skills I'd developed over years, while adding purpose beyond profit. My relationship with Chloe evolved in unexpected ways. After her 18th birthday, she began visiting monthly, our conversations gradually moving from cautious to genuine. She was experiencing her own awakening about our family dynamics. Mom completely lost it when I applied to colleges out of state, she confided during one visit. She said I was abandoning her, just like Joey did. It was the first time I really understood what you meant about guilt trips. I was careful not to demonize our mother, recognizing that Chloe's relationship with her was distinct from mine. Mom and I had a specific dynamic that started before you were born, I explained. Your experience is naturally different, and that's okay. But I also validated her emerging recognition of manipulation tactics. It's possible to love someone while acknowledging their unhealthy behaviors, I told her. and it's okay to set boundaries even with family. When Chloe was accepted to a university 3 hours away, I helped her move into her dorm, an experience I'd never had having worked through my own move-in day alone. Watching her arrange her room excited about this new chapter, I felt a bittersweet pride. Mom refused to come today, she admitted, as we assembled a desk lamp. She said I was betraying her by leaving. I nodded, understanding all too well. What matters is that you're doing what's right for your future. Sometimes the people who should support us most have the hardest time seeing us as separate individuals with our own paths. My personal healing continued through therapy, journaling, and gradually building healthier relationships. Dating remained challenging. My trust issues hadn't vanished overnight, but I was more aware of them, better able to communicate my boundaries and needs. I reconnected with Richard's brother Alan and sister Patricia, discovering an extended family that welcomed me without reservation. Family gatherings with them felt comfortable in a way I'd never experienced growing up, relaxed, supportive, free from walking on eggshells. The final piece fell into place, almost 2 years after Richard's death. I received an email from Greg, surprising in both its existence and content. Joey, I've been reflecting on your childhood and my role in it. While I can't speak for your mother, I want to acknowledge that I saw the unfair treatment and did nothing. I regret that silence. I should have advocated for you. This isn't an excuse or a request, just an overdue apology that you deserve. The acknowledgement, simple as it was, provided an unexpected sense of closure. I didn't respond immediately, taking time to process this first-ever recognition from anyone in that household that my experience had been real, not imagined or exaggerated. Eventually, I sent a brief reply. Thank you for this acknowledgement. It means more than you might realize. We didn't establish ongoing communication, but the exchange marked an important moment in my healing journey. External validation of what I had always known, but had been consistently denied. As I approach my 34th birthday, I can look back on these past 2 years with a sense of peace I never thought possible. The inheritance from Richard provided financial security. Yes, but the greater gifts were the recognition, the validation, and the opportunity to reclaim my narrative. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood or legal ties, but by consistent love, respect, and support. I've built my chosen family from friends, supportive mentors, and the relatives who have embraced me without condition. I've discovered that standing in your truth, while terrifying, brings a freedom that compliance never could. The short-term discomfort of confrontation ultimately led to long-term peace that years of acquiescence never provided. Most importantly, I've learned that breaking cycles of dysfunction sometimes requires difficult choices. By refusing to participate in toxic patterns, I've created space for something healthier, not just for myself, but potentially for Chloe and future generations. The inheritance Richard left wasn't ultimately about money. It was about worth, about being seen, valued, and chosen, about having someone acknowledge that I deserved investment, consideration, and love, not because of what I could do for them, but simply because I existed. That recognition, more than any financial sum, was the true inheritance, and it's one I carry forward every day, investing it in healthier relationships and a life defined by choice rather than obligation. What about you? Have you ever had to make difficult decisions about family relationships for your own well-being, or found validation from unexpected sources after years of self-doubt? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember, sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength on your own journey to finding peace and creating the family connections you deserve.